Right, today we're going to talk about two important stories. One of them is mine and one of them is Justin's. Mine, which you might be aware of if you've been scrolling on social media recently, is about this video that Donald Trump has shared. It's AI generated and it shows the war zone in Gaza turned into a holiday resort, that Riviera that he spoke about. It is a chance for us to really unpick his social media strategy and what he's going for here.
And the thing I'm going to introduce is Elon Musk and what he's doing to the federal government, because it seems to be not only cutting through if you're a federal government worker, but also cutting through politically and not necessarily in a good way for Donald Trump. So we're going to focus on two things of huge importance and for once put everything else to one side. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it is Marianna, aka Misinformation, sitting alongside Justin in the worldwide headquarters as well.
Donald's coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright.
As you might imagine, the video itself has sparked a pretty strong reaction on social media. So Trump posted it originally on Truth Social. And if you haven't seen the video, it starts off by showing children in the war zone in Gaza. They're obviously AI generated, like it looks a bit cartoony. And then quickly it becomes this sort of holiday resort. And you've got Elon Musk sort of eating away on the beach. You've got Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, sipping cocktails on sort of sun loungers. You've got a golden statue of Donald Trump that's massive, and a kind of like Trump Tower that says Trump Gaza. And it has that kind of satirical feel. AI is used often in that way, kind of to be illustrative of a point. And the point that it is being illustrative of is one that Donald Trump had made before, where he basically suggested that he was considering what would you call it? He was considering...
Or chucking everyone out. Really,
yeah.
And not necessarily letting them all back in. That's the point.
Into Gaza and making it this Riviera of the Middle East. This is what he said.
And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
As you can imagine, like those comments at the time had, you know, the UN, various international governments, the international community, really outraged. They were condemning the comments. They suggested that this could, you know, be similar to ethnic cleansing, this idea that you kind of get rid of everyone, you don't have them back, all that kind of thing. And so this video has in some ways compounded and exacerbated those feelings. But then there are other people saying this is so kind of absurd. It's obviously satirical. It's obviously a joke. But I guess that's the whole point, is that Donald Trump wants us to be talking about it. He wants everyone on social media to be talking about it. And they are, whether they really, really don't like it or whether they really like it.
It reminded me of what we've said many times before. If you're a conventional politician or a conventional diplomat or a conventional world leader and you're faced with Donald Trump, God, it's difficult, isn't it? Really difficult.
And I think as well, this tells us so much about the playbook, the tactics of Donald Trump. And I actually think that's a really good way of analysing this, because in some ways, I think if you were sitting inside Donald Trump's top team right now, you'd be wanting podcasters like me and you to say, oh, what an outrage. This is terrible. How could someone post this? That's kind of the intention, is to get everyone doing that so that actually they can kind of turn around and say, oh, you don't really get it. You don't understand. Or, you know, it's obviously a joke, or it's not intended to cause offence in that way, inverted commas, etc. And when we think about the tactics, firstly, where did this come from? So has it been created by Donald Trump and his team or not? I've had a bit of a browse on social media, as I tend to do. And if you look... a few weeks ago, so sort of start of February, the same video was shared, a really similar video or almost identical video was shared on YouTube, on Facebook, and even on LinkedIn, actually. So this content appears to have been created by other users. And that is something Donald Trump does all the time. I mean, one of the things he's always been very well known for is the ability to kind of reuse and share almost like fan content or content from supporters or content from users who you're not even quite sure who they are and where they're based, but they generate memes and videos and pictures and he reshares them. Like he did this before when he shared some of those pictures of Taylor Swift supporting him, some of which were AI generated, or Taylor Swift fans, Swifties supporting him. He kind of pulls from the internet, or his team pull from the internet and reshare this stuff. So it seems like those accounts aren't affiliated with the White House, the ones I've looked at. Obviously, it's quite tricky to know exactly who they are, and I've sent them some messages and stuff like that. But the suggestion would be that he's kind of picked this up and gone, right.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really interesting here is to think about the wider social media context. So, Justin, you probably haven't come across these, but there's this real trend at the moment on social media of AI-generated videos showing like historical moments or significant days or a day in the life. So, for example, there's ones that show the last day of Pompeii. Like, what would it be like to wake up on that last day in Pompeii before the volcano erupted? Or like ones that show a day in the life of Taylor Swift.
It's your fault that I haven't come across it, because everything I do come across, you actually give me. But anyway, you messed up there, but whatever.
But it's quite interesting. I mean, there's questions over the historical accuracy of some of these videos and everything else. But they're kind of like being in a video game.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you get a chance to kind of live through a moment in history. And so I guess set against that backdrop, if you were Donald Trump's team and you were being quite social media savvy, you'd think, well, there's loads of this kind of first-person AI-generated video content, like imagining situations that are quite obviously not real. Like, you wouldn't think you were actually, there in Pompeii, or you wouldn't think that, they're quite obviously faked. But they're a chance to sort of imagine or envisage a particular scenario. And so within that context and how prolific and really popular those videos have been, like they're racking up millions of views. If you had, say, Barron Trump in your ear saying, Donald Trump's son saying, oh, look, Dad, this is the thing that everyone's posting, you could see why you might say, okay, right, there's a video that's kind of like this. They're very different, but they all are of that theme. And we know during the election, Donald Trump was particularly good in that. He was particularly effective, is probably the better word, at jumping on particular trends and kind of seeing where the social media noise was moving towards. I mean, he popped up with all of those streamers, podcasters, etc., and that content did really well. So there's whoever it is around him who's spotting this stuff is kind of on top of the trends in that way.
It's also, it struck me, reckless in a way that is important, I think, when you think about Trump and you think about the kind of Trump movement and the modern American right more widely. They celebrate masculinity, and one of the things that they approve of and like in masculinity is the way in which men tend to be more reckless than women. And you've got that kind of sense of, just put it out there. What the heck? It'll upset people. It doesn't matter. It'll amuse people. That's great. Whatever.
Yeah, and I think it's also, which we chat about a lot, but the social media algorithms and how they work, and therefore what works, which is exactly that point, that a certain amount of recklessness, and if we're talking about recklessness, it's, content that will... You share it knowing it will provoke a reaction, whether it's negative or positive. That is what these recommendation systems that push us stuff online favour. They favour emotions, they run off emotions, they favour engagement. So when you put out a video like this, you know that there'll be a lot of people saying, that's bizarre. There'll be a lot of people saying that's absurd. There'll be a lot of people who are incredibly offended. You can imagine there have been thousands of people killed in Gaza. You can imagine how distressing it is to see a video like that and think, what is happening here? This is the President of the United States. So that will be the reaction. You also know there'll be people who will say, this is a form of trolling, I like it. And it's spread like wildfire from Trump's own social media site, Truth Social, onto all the other platforms because people are sharing it in this way.
And it does raise the issue, doesn't it? Where next? What happens to all of this next? We've had an interesting question on that, actually, from Ed in Lincoln, who says, how do you see the use of AI on social media playing out in the coming years? Will it make America more and more divided, going to all the things we've just been talking about? Or will people eventually realise things are so manipulated they just turn off to the madness? They're really interesting. I mean, the honest answer is neither of us know, but we'll give it a go.
No, I know. Hostage to fortune. No, it's a really good question. I think, how do people use AI? One. And then I think the second point is about this polarization thing. Like, if you're using it to kind of illustrate points, you're actually just using it to, in perhaps an even more visceral way. Like, that video is much more grabby and punchy than like even
a party
the press,
political broadcast.
Yeah, even like the press, even the comments that Donald Trump made at the presser, they now kind of pale in comparison to that. When you see a video like that, because you can kind of imagine it, like it does the imagining for you, I think it does have the impact of inspiring an even stronger emotional response. If you look at politics across the world, on the whole, politicians and parties on the right, although there are some on the left, certainly further on the left, who are good at this, are better at gaming that kind of emotional thing on social media. They're just better at it. But if you look actually in the past, like quite a lot of left-wing parties were actually pretty good at that themselves, and it's kind of changed. And it's the point we talk about, the sort of idea that the Democrats, for example, have framed themselves as the kind of sensible adults, which doesn't make, like, they wouldn't put out a video like that because that doesn't fit with the way that they've styled themselves, whereas Donald Trump has styled himself as the complete opposite. So of course he can, but it means that he does get the eyeballs, he does get the attention and the numbers for this kind of stuff in a way that other people don't. He's also the president at the moment.
It also, of course, means that politics, when you try to present really serious, nuanced solutions to world problems, say you want to put out a video about how you think there needs to be a two-state solution, all the things that a kind of a Middle East analyst who had everyone's best interests at heart might want to. Where the heck? I mean, who watches that video? What? How do you get? I mean, this isn't a question necessarily for you, but the question that's raised, isn't it, is how do you get a look into modern politics if you are complex and think that things are complex?
And the thing is that things on the whole are complex, and that's this difficulty of the tension between algorithmic systems, which rely on often simple and quite extreme messaging, versus complex, nuanced arguments. What I would say, though, and it's actually this point that Ed makes about will people feel like they just want to turn off the madness, I do think there's a certain pushback from, I hear it from Americasters getting in touch with me, but I also see it on social media quite a lot, just from people in the comments. It's like people don't always... They still might be getting sucked into this online world, but they don't always like it. Like, there is still a kind of appetite for nuance. The question is just whether you're being... I think the problem is that people are generally encountering this sorts of stuff because it's popping up on their feeds, because it's coming to them. You know, you open up your phone and you see this video almost straight away because people are resharing it. And the nuanced stuff you have to actively seek out. But I think it's a question of whether people actually do get exhausted by the stuff being pushed to them and decide to seek this stuff out. And actually, if you look at, for example, Americasters who love podcasts, there is a desire for people to kind of explain stuff and talk about stuff. The problem is that for politicians right now, that doesn't feel like necessarily a beneficial route to winning an election.
Yeah. I think Ed's point, do they turn off to the madness, is exactly right. An awful lot of people are more thoughtful than all of this stuff and videos like this give them credit for. And actually, I mean, they might see the video, but what are they going to do? Suddenly say, I don't know, whatever the video wants them to say. They are going to be more interested in Trump than they would have been if the video didn't exist. And that, as you pointed out, that's the kind of central issue. But the point of being pushed in one direction or another politically, it's much less, isn't it?
Okay, Justin, it is your turn. And actually, you're talking about one of my chosen topics, my mastermind topic, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk and the things that he's doing, and the things that he's doing that might be having more than just an impact on federal workers, and there are a lot of federal workers, and we've discussed this before, more than 2 million dotted around the United States. But the interesting thing about what he's doing is that it seems now to be impacting not just them, but on the wider politics as well. So what he's actually done is this. He wrote this email entitled, "What Did You Do Last Week?" And the email asks, indeed commands, all federal employees to reply to their immediate boss, but also copying in Doge with what they have done, 5 things that they've done in the last week. And the White House press secretary I saw very perkily saying that she had easily done it.
We advise federal workers, unless your agency has dictated you not to respond to this email. In fact, I can announce that we've had more than 1 million workers who have chosen to participate in this very simple task of, again, sending 5 bullet points to your direct supervisor or manager, CCing OPM. I actually participated in myself. It took me about a minute and a half to think of 5 things I did last week. I do 5 things in about 10 minutes, and all federal workers should be working at the same pace that President Trump is working and moving.
And the email goes out, and a lot of people are then saying, have we all got to reply to this? And some government agencies, including the FBI, say to their own employees, actually, no, don't tell everyone what you've been doing in the last week, because it might be secret or it might be sensitive in some way. We obviously can't ask you to do that. And then it gets even more complicated, because they then say, if you haven't responded to the email, it will be considered a resignation issue. There's then a suggestion from Elon Musk that actually this isn't entirely real. And the phrase he uses, we just want to see if federal workers have a pulse. And then on top of that, there are some people they just fired or they appeared to fire willy-nilly, and then had to hire back, like the people in charge of nuclear security, looking after the kind of nuclear weapons, making sure they were safe, etc. So the whole thing is quite chaotic. That is where politically it all gets much more difficult, and that is where we seem to be now with Elon Musk.
It's almost that same tension we were just talking about before, between sort of like, how does serious politics happen, and then also this idea that actually serious politics has, certainly for some Trump voters, been kind of letting them down, and they don't feel well represented, and they don't feel like stuff's efficient. And so Donald Trump and Elon Musk are there to save the day. Other people would see it as the opposite, that they're there to sort of like mess stuff up and blow things up. But
you've got to actually save it. If you're there to save the day, you've got to save it.
And Elon Musk is not someone who radiates whatever the opposite of chaos is. And it's, I guess, to what extent chaos is a beneficial look for Donald Trump because chaos makes it seem like they're doing stuff, or does chaos make it seem like they're doing stuff and not know what they're doing?
And it's interesting to see Donald Trump at the moment saying, I mean, he's done a thing on Truth Social. All cabinet members are extremely happy with Elon. That bit's in capitals. The media will see that at the cabinet meeting this morning. This was just before a cabinet meeting.
Lowercase there.
Lowercase there, yeah. Well, maybe they weren't.
Maybe he does know where the lowercase is.
So they did have this cabinet meeting, and Elon Musk was there, which is odd in itself. I mean, it's not completely unique for people who aren't in the cabinet to attend cabinet. I think actually Joe Biden's wife, attended a bit. So it's not a completely weird thing. Although it just feels strange at the beginning of an administration to have such an obviously powerful figure of indeterminate status hanging around the table, and potentially saying to individual members of the cabinet, I'm going to sack everyone who works for you. So that, there are tensions.
And also, I guess that Elon Musk has built his whole brand on this idea that he's kind of like in opposition to the government and sticking up against, stick it to the man sort of thing. I mean, caveat that he is a very rich, powerful person, but still, he's really built himself on that kind of, I want to blow it up from within kind of thing.
And also, when you're a disruptor, you're talking in the abstract a bit. You suddenly now have to deal politically with people you have disrupted. And that might mean families. And it does mean families if people actually do end up losing their jobs. And it means people who you probably shouldn't have got rid of because they were doing a really useful job. And there are all sorts of sort of aspects to this where the rubber hits the road and suddenly it becomes politically much more difficult. And you do wonder whether Elon Musk is possibly reaching that stage. And certainly some Americans are, including people who've been in touch with us. I've got to read you one. I'll sub this down a bit, but Ginger in North Virginia has emailed us saying, I'm sure there are people who voted for Trump who are feeling some remorse for what their choices have resulted in. I have a colleague who works in the federal government. This person that Ginger knows, her parents are some of the above-mentioned voters. In other words, they voted for Trump. When she mentioned she was scared, her father's response was on the lines of, sorry you're scared, but it's time we took back your country. You can always find another job, not realizing or wanting to understand that in Northern Virginia, job scarcity is going to be a real thing. And that's, as Ginger points out, because the number one employer in Northern Virginia is the federal government. But I mean, there are other areas of America too, and right around the states where federal government workers are really worried about what is going on. And there are suggestions that some of those people are now bringing it to politicians and saying enough is enough. And there was one specific thing, and it was a town hall meeting. Congress people hold these town hall meetings where everyone come along and say what they wanted to. And it was a guy called Rich McCormick. He's a Republican congressman holding a town hall in Georgia, and it got pretty feisty.
Tyranny is rising in the White House, and a man has declared himself our king. So I would like to know, rather, the people would like to know what you, congressmen, and your fellow congressmen are going to do to rein in the megalomaniac in the White House.
It's interesting because looking at the undercover voters, my fictional characters with different social media profiles, the ones who don't like Donald Trump very much, clips like this are cutting through, particularly ones where you've got individuals asking questions about themselves or about people they know, personal stories, people who kind of feel that sense that this idea of like Donald Trump being a king, they feel as though he's doing this dictator for a day thing he spoke about before, and that all of their worst fears are coming true. And so that kind of stuff is certainly cutting through amongst the people. And I guess to some extent, energizing a group of people who had not felt quite so energized after the election. But then I would also say that on the other side, the people who like Donald Trump, this stuff isn't quite getting as much traction, certainly from my undercover voters and what I've seen, probably because there's clips like that Gaza one. There's constant stuff that is just re-enters the fray. And so this stuff doesn't hang around for very long. And then it moves on. And it's the most extreme stuff that will get the eyeballs. And so this stuff kind of slightly falls into that grey area of, oh, it's not as extreme as that AI-generated video of Gaza.
Yeah. I do wonder if Elon Musk himself contains kind of within himself, personality-wise, the seeds of his own destruction politically and the seeds of Donald Trump's destruction, which Donald Trump will be very aware of. And when the moment comes, will push the SpaceX ejector seat quite hard, because if this does become a story of cruelty to decent Americans who are trying to do their best for the country, and that is something that takes off, not just on the left-wing media and MSNBC or the rest of it, but actually becomes something where people are saying, hang on a second, these federal workers, we need them to do X, Y, or Z. And
or like stuff doesn't work in the way it...
Or, exactly, stuff doesn't work. You think of RFK, there's already a measles outbreak in the southern US. If there are things that begin to happen that seem genuinely to people, not just for a sort of political rhetoric, but genuinely seem to people, hang on a second, we didn't really vote for that, we didn't want that to happen, then you can see a real problem for them.
I find it interesting thinking about when we've been talking about all of this stuff, particularly like the video, the Gaza video, like who exactly is advising Donald Trump on those things? And there's this slight impression, and it's not necessarily the only impression you could get from this, but Donald Trump knows how to work the media. Donald Trump knows how to, that is his sort of domain. He knows how to deal with what we'd call the professional or the traditional or whatever you want to call it media. But all this other stuff like Elon Musk and he did, know how to use Twitter and used to use it to great effect. And he's always been social media savvy, I guess, in terms of his campaigning and stuff. It's one of the things that I think has served him well throughout his time in politics. But to what extent does he really get this stuff? Does he really get Elon? Does he really get X? Does he get like these AI videos of Pompeii and these AI videos of Gaza? And how much of this is from him and how much of it is him trusting all the people around him? And I think there's a point where there's a risk that he takes a step because he's following what other people know a lot about, but maybe he doesn't know so much about, and it goes wrong. Like, I think that could happen, but it's kind of hard to know. And at the moment, lots of the advice he's been getting on this stuff seems to be having the desired effect, whatever that effect is, whether you hate it or you love it. But you do just wonder whether, like Trump is not your traditional social media user either. And in the sense that he's older, a lot of this stuff is new. He's been very good at adapting to this world and learning to kind of involve it, which is kind of why Elon Musk has been so beneficial. It's like, I get it now. This is the new thing. This is modern. This is the new reiteration of it all. But you just wonder if that could also be his own downfall, the thing that's kind of made him this time around. Yeah. Could be the thing that kind of unravels if he kind of doesn't get it, because it's quite fast moving and hard to navigate.
Also, all the Doge stuff, if you're a genuine conservative Republican of the old school, the kind of people who were there when I was there in the time of George W. Bush and the Tea Party, who genuinely believe that the biggest threat to America is the huge national debt and the deficits year on year that add to it. And unless you get to cutting some expenditure, you're not really a proper conservative. And that, of course, is not part of Trumpism at all. Doge is meant to be a sort of sop in a way to those people to say we're going to cut this, that and the other. But I mean, you already see and you hear from people on that kind of right wing of the party, hang on a second, Doge is a bit of a joke. We've got to actually start to cut stuff. And I think they'll get quite frustrated if it's just about, we're no longer going to pay for whatever, a DEI video for people in Colombia or whatever, that doesn't satisfy them, because they really do genuinely, it's not just a political thing for them, they genuinely think America must start to spend less. And if Doge doesn't come up with the goods, they're not going to be happy either. Okay, that's it. If you want more, though, it's available on BBC Sounds. See you all later. Bye-bye.
Americast.
Americast from BBC News.